is what we are doing now, and we've got our panelists here, and we are so pleased to have them of these topics that we have today. Our panelists, Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Cliff.
How are you, sir?
Okay.
Good. And of course, we all know the wonderful Rochelle Crump when you start talking about women. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Present and accounted for, sir.
Good. Sean Claiborne is with us. We're going to talk about money and some other things. He's always there. And thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Good. And I want to mention that Attorney Ernesto Borges was supposed to be with us, and he let us know, and I always ask about his wife. She has some health challenges, so she can't be here. So we'll be certainly hoping that she's going to be all right. We want to talk about a number of things. We're going to start off with a CNN audio following up veterans' reaction to Trump downplaying traumatic brain injury. Listen up.
The military is now looking at strengthening these protective bunkers at the Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, where more than 100 U.S. troops suffered traumatic brain injuries after an Iranian ballistic missile attack. Bunker improvements to provide better protection against those injuries that President Trump has continuously dismissed.
I can report it is not very serious. Not very serious. I heard that they had headaches.
But his own Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, acknowledging it is something more.
And this was a new challenge to us. It's the first time we've seen our service members subject to a ballistic missile attack with a 1,000-pound-plus warhead.
More than 400,000 U.S. troops have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, or TBI, in the last 2 decades. Now, the Pentagon is searching for crucial protection from the blast pressure of weapons explosions. For some military families and veterans, the president's continued downplaying of TBI brought fresh grief and a renewed push to bring attention to the seriousness of these injuries. Ryan Bridge survived several blasts in Afghanistan. He still wakes up with headaches a decade later.
The public needs to know that traumatic brain injury is a serious injury.
Frank, yes, thank you very much.
Frank Larkin, a retired Senate Sergeant at Arms, Navy SEAL, and Secret Service agent, wrote to Trump about the suicide of his son Ryan, also a former Navy SEAL, after the president's comments.
It was a hit to the gut.
Larkin writing Trump's words were an undeserved punch felt by every person suffering from a TBI, their shattered families, and supporting communities.
Ryan had always said, something's wrong with my head, but nobody believes me.
On April 23, 2017, Ryan Larkin took his own life. His parents had watched their son deteriorate after years of his brain being subjected to military blasts. They donated his brain to a military medical study on the relationship of TBI and blast waves.
3 months later, they called us in and said, your son had an undiagnosed severe level of microscopic brain injury directly related to blast exposure.
That's a very, very unfortunate situation, obviously. Doc?
Yes, yeah, this is an ongoing problem, and the recognition of traumatic brain injury is becoming more and more apparent. We used to call it shell shock in the past, and give it various names over time. But it's even now we're getting to the point where the body armor, central body armor, is able to protect you to the point where you can be even closer to these blast exposures, and you can still survive them. But the shock wave that's introduced to the brain, because the brain is like a jelly inside of a very hard, rock-hard skull, and as the brain shifts and moves around, it can become damaged. And there are special tests that can be done, and we need to make sure that every veteran who comes forward with this complaint is adequately, professionally, and done by someone who has competency in order to conduct these studies. And so I'm just I'm grateful for them coming forward, and I want to say condolences to the family for the loss of their son.
Sure.
And this goes on all the time.
This is a horrific situation, without a doubt. If anybody has a call in, you know, we always want to hear from you. 312-374-8130. There are all kind of things that are going on now, and we just have to see what's going on. There's a CNN audio. U.S. and Taliban signed an agreement. Ernesto was going to take care of that, but this was a handout military, so we're not gonna. Okay, good. Doc, go ahead.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
You know, we had two topics we were talking about earlier, but it was there is a CNN report, and it's from a top U.S. General, say that militaries are preparing for all coronavirus scenarios, including potential pandemic. Mm-hmm. And they actually had, this was a source for an article, but it was, grounded, no bowling, dining out, or handshakes for U.S. troops in South Korea after first soldier infected with coronavirus. And one of the things is that the American commanders in South Korea have imposed health protection condition Charlie for 28,500 U.S. troops and their families, which places restrictions on activities and interpersonal contact after an American soldier stationed was found to tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. Now, COVID is a contraction of a word. It's actually coronavirus disease found in the year 2019. And the actual organism that causes this is called SARS-CoV-2. So it's the severe acute respiratory syndrome virus.
Wow.
And so this actually happened in an area where the soldier was based, and that was in Camp Carroll in a town near Daegu, where the latest outbreak is centered. So he actually is under self-quarantine now, and they are doing contact tracing to find out who he actually came in contact with and what the spread of this virus would be. But the officials there in Korea actually noted that there were 216 of the 284 cases actually came from that town. So the USKF is implementing all appropriate control measures to help control the spread of the virus. But the level of of urgency is actually still level high because of the potential for this to actually spread to the troops.
Yeah.
So there are several things that people can do. We know that the troops usually get vaccinated before they go overseas.
Right.
You know, even here in our own country, we should be, making sure that people get their influenza vaccine, have enough medications on hand. People who have chronic diseases like diabetes, COPD, should be making sure they go back and get their medical conditions evaluated early, and make sure that they have adequate medications on hand. Wash their hands, don't touch your face. The N95 mask is nothing.
Yeah.
Now, Doc, how does this differ for a regular flu? Like, what's the difference between, like, say, the COVID-19 versus a bad flu?
Okay, the COVID-19, right now we don't really know all the how bad it can get. The COVID-19 virus actually, initially they said it was a death rate of about 2.6%, which means almost 3 people out of 100 people who got it would die.
Yeah.
But then that started to fall down because we didn't know the denominator. And I'll give you an example. If you were at a intersection and you had 8 car accidents there, right? You would think that's terrible. Why did you have 8 car accidents? But we don't know what the time frame is for those 8 car accidents. We don't know if about 100 cars went through, which would make it terrible, 8 out of 100, or if 10 million cars went through that same intersection, 8 out of 10 million. So as they find that, they're finding that the actual risk for death is actually much lower than what they thought initially.
This is something I think is very interesting too. Honor Flight, Illinois recognizing women veterans. NBC News has an audio.
Taliban. Yes. Taliban is next.
I want to show you what just happened moments ago, this historic moment in Doha, Qatar. Representatives of the United States and the Taliban signing this agreement aimed at bringing peace to Afghanistan.
So part of this plan, American forces in Afghanistan would be reduced. It also paved the way for peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. More than 2,400 Americans have died over 18 years of fighting in Afghanistan. It is the longest fought conflict in American history. And there was a moment here at the end where just after the signing, a handshake between a representative of the United States and one of the leaders of the Taliban.
Thank God the war is over.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's been the longest war in U.S. history. And then now we're basically trying to see what we can do to try to keep the peace. I mean, so we're still going to keep about, I think it was 8,000 troops going to be still stationed there. We're taking about 4,000 off the table. So I mean, that's a step in the right direction. But hopefully we don't get into these long, drawn out conflicts with no resolution in sight. I mean, thank God this didn't turn out as bad as Vietnam. But we got to get away from these long, drawn out conflicts they have no real clear, definite mission that's involved with trying to resolve the actual conflict.
Yeah, but the thing that really gets me about that I'm really concerned about is that it seems as though this was a move to have political exigency and expediency during an election time frame. So whether this is actually something that we can count on and count on with an enemy that we've been working with, whether that actually is something that we can count on as a nation going forward, because political cycles move and people go from through cycles of holding office. But is this something that this country can actually depend on in the future and take our forces out of harm's way?
So we shall see on that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. We certainly want to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, the honor flight, NBC News.
A first-of-its-kind mission to highlight the contributions of women in the military. This morning, an all-female flight of veterans is leaving for Washington, D.C. to visit the war memorials there built in their honor. NBC5's Kai Martin is live with more for us. Kai?
Marion, the ceremony to officially announce that Operation Her Story, a special trip to D.C. for 100 women's veterans, is a go, is still taking place right behind me here at the Pritzker Military Library. So we stepped outside to bring you more on this story. This announcement ceremony is complete with the color guard from Naval Station Great Lakes, the women saluting. It was solemn, yet there's excitement here too. While Honor Flight Illinois for men is very well known, there's never been a trip just for women's veterans here in the state. Operation Her Story will take off in October, and it's far from full at this point. One reason organizers say is that women who served in support positions often minimize their role. Most women 80 years ago had few options when joining up, but these women were caring for the injured. They were issuing manifests, doing VA paperwork. The flight is about validating their military service.
We are looking for women who served from 1940 to 1975 during 3 conflicts. One was the World War II, another Korean War, and Vietnam. When they left the military, they would go home and they would become a wife or student, or they would fit into society as a regular person. They didn't go to the American Legion Halls of VFW. It just was a no-no.
Amazing. Rochelle?
Yes. Operation Her Story.
Yeah.
Okay, when you think about that, you put yourself in the position of the woman who has served, and she has a story. We all have a story.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm very happy and proud to be on that committee. I'm actually co-chair of the outreach. And it was an amazing event, to finally announce it, even though it's gone other places. I've seen it in the news already, but it was just that major time that all of us came together to actually be seen together, just kind of a glimpse of what it's going to look like the day of the event. And when you think about Operation Her Story, I mean, the women who are going starting with World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and then there's going to be some support women going also. And those are the younger veterans that are in Iraq, Afghanistan, who are volunteering also, along with a lot of medical team. And, it is just an amazing outreach for all of us to be able to be in one place. And I am really excited about it. And plus, I'm on that flight, too. So
that's great. Congratulations.
That's my air. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you so much. And they're doing a wonderful job in, tracking it. My whole thing was about making sure that African American women were not left out of this part of, this trip, because it is so important. Looking back at the males going to Washington, D.C. on the honor flight, the last one of our members went, she's a Vietnam veteran. There were 3 women on that flight, 7 African Americans total, and the 119 that were actually of other cultures, mostly one culture.
It's nice to know, too, that they are recognizing people now other than Rosie the Riveter.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's part of her story.
Oh, sure
you know what
it
I'm
is.
saying? So
Certainly.
that's part of her story. It means a lot. Every woman has a story, like I said, and then we can look at the New York Times, and you're talking about the first woman, who is going to be in the Green Beret. She's going to be a Green Beret in the force, the special
Forces,
ops.
yeah.
This is amazing all by itself. So those continued stories, just amazing women, and this is a young woman too, enlisted. She's enlisted, and when you look at that and you think about, she had to be mentally and physically strong in order to get through that potential to be a part of it, So you have to know how strong she is, to get past, because with more men on there, because women are not in the special ops, and they're not, in that area. So, she really had to prove herself. She proved herself. And, just looking at weapons, intelligence, and medical engineering, she had to pass all that stuff, and navigation.
We have all these good news things. Thank goodness. I love it. I love it, as you well know.
Absolutely.
But there's a whistleblower that claims leaders of VA sought damaging information on women.
Absolutely.
Alleging sexual assault.
And when you look at that, that's another story. It's another story that a woman has to tell. It's the story of them against us. That's what it looks like a lot of times. And it's, why would she have to make that up? And when you think about Me Too and how many were denied, oh, that didn't happen. She doesn't have to do that. She's already had notoriety being in the Veterans Affairs, component in which she is, part of legislation. She helps create legislation. She's monitoring it, So it's no reason for them not to believe that happened to her. I think she had better things to do than just say, hey, that man did something to me, and that's the story that we all have to go through, though. And it has to be told over and over again. If she has to go and file a claim for it, if something happens in the military, it didn't happen, you have to prove that it happened. How can I prove that it happened when you don't have cameras there, you don't have a witness, you know what I'm saying? So it's your word against their word. And it's a horrible thing to have to do when you spend that much time in the military. She's a lieutenant. She was, and then they're trying to find things that were in her record and things like that. What is all that they got to do with it? It reminds me, It reminds me of when veterans, females for sure, go to the hospital and they get agitated with the treatment that they get when they have to tell that story again, or when they go in for treatment and now they look in your records to see if you are mentally stable in there, and now they want to treat you a certain way. That means security can be called, well, I shouldn't call them security, that's true.
That's terrible.
The federal police is called to stand by to monitor the situation. It's not necessary. A lot of times it is just not necessary. So when you look at those stories over and over again, it's damaging to every woman. And if it happens one place or to one woman, it's happening across the world.
Thank you so much. Sean, you're our person with money. The Military Times. The Military Times had a handout. Pentagon budget calls for civilianizing military hospital. What about that, Sean?
Yeah, they're trying to basically save money by trying to force or have more veterans use outside facilities instead of using things inside the VA. So this is basically a trend that's been going on for the last maybe 20, 30 years or so, but particularly more so in the last 10 to 15 years. You're starting to see the VA privatized in such a way that they'll give the veterans options to go and use VA non-VA facilities. But the problem is with that is the pushback is that does a civilian doctor have the same type of eyes and ears to basically pick up on some of the disabilities and some of the injuries that a veteran has? Because when you look at the situation, veterans are used to being around other veterans. So the idea of this saying, okay, we're going to start to scale back some of these two facilities and actually let them go to civilian hospitals. Now, if you want to do that for a choice and you feel more comfortable, by all means do that.
Sure.
One thing I thought that was interesting, Cliff, is that the VA actually had a rating system, it was a star system on the website. 1 to 5 stars basically told you if that hospital was a good VA hospital or a bad VA facility. Okay, 1 star was bad, 5 stars was great. A lot of the VA facilities were falling short, 3 stars or less. Okay, that was probably the majority, if not at least a third, which is still deplorable, of those facilities getting from 3 stars to 1 star. Starting January of this year, the VA system under Shulkin's leadership decided to not have that type of rating system on the website. They went to a system that was more like the regular hospital system. So instead of looking at, oh, this facility good or bad, is it highly rated or not highly rated, it's how long do you wait for a doctor? How long do you have to get treated for an illness? Were you happy with your treatment? Things like that. More subjective things that don't give you a real concrete answer as to what the real quality of care is. To make it, and also to do this to make it look like other hospitals. So the VA system can kind of mask the quality. Now, for argument's sake, you can say that does kind of level the playing field in some ways, because now you have an apples to apples comparison between what a VA facility can do versus what a civilian hospital can do. But the problem with that also is that you don't really have a real gauge as to what type of care you're getting. I think back to my father's situation. He was in the Air Force. He went to the VA hospital in D.C. Okay, the VA hospital in D.C. wanted to amputate his leg. Now, that's pretty severe and tragic on its own. He went to my sister, who was a hospital administrator, took him to a regular hospital across the street, and they actually said, you have gout, you just need some medication. He got medication, and all of a sudden he was perfectly fine. Okay, so it went from the risk of losing his leg to just having some medication, being perfectly fine, living 20 more years and not having any issues at all. Okay, so yeah, some of the VA hospitals do suck.
Can I say this real quick? It's fine to have an evaluation of the facility, but what about rating the physician?
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's something that does not happen, and no one knows or has information on really how to go about that. I don't know, maybe Dr. Arnold knows, can you report the physician in the VA hospital or not? Because that's important.
Yeah. Well, you can, but the thing is that we have to break the collective consciousness of the veteran is trying to be a fake. The veteran is coming back with a condition that is not grounded in truth. And when veterans go and you are examined by someone who is seeing you, they should be seeing you as a patient that needs to have an adequate evaluation and testing that arrives at a diagnosis if one exists. But there seems to be a pushback by the government to recognize people's conditions. And I've known veterans who, have waited 10 years to get a condition recognized. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, you did have that. And so I think that's really where I have the problem with the VA system. The actual care, if they're doing an upper endoscopy, they're doing a colonoscopy, those kinds of things, they're pretty good. I mean, they do have adequate, but my thing is really when it comes to evaluating service members for service-connected conditions that I have a problem.
In particular, invisible wounds.
Yes.
In particular.
Yes.
We are, of course, pleased to have these great folks with us, and we will continue more. That was Col Dr. Damon Arnold you just heard, and of course that very proud lady is Rochelle Crump, and the gentleman who tells us where the money is going and where it is and so forth. We're always pleased to have him, Sharon Claiborne, and Attorney Ernesto Borges was supposed to be with us today, but his wife was sick, so we wanted to make sure.
Yes.
We hope she's well. Okay.